folks that do binge eat tend to have had childhood environments where their parents were not able to validate their feelings or didn't model that. So they don't know how to do that. And you're absolutely right. Then maybe they turn to food. Again, maybe like, thank goodness food was there for them because maybe they didn't have anybody else that was.
Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Davidson, your host and creator of my wellness podcast, Mind the Gaps, where we work on surrendering our typical ways of looking at life to step out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone. I'm so excited to introduce the 30th episode of Mind the Gaps podcast, The Equilibrium of Food and Fitness, where I'm joined by registered psychotherapist and my good friend, Shauna Wallace. Shauna specializes in supporting individuals experiencing disordered eating, body image challenges, trauma, and life transitions. She's been a group fitness instructor for over 8 years and is also a certified intuitive eating counselor, bringing a non-diet, trauma-informed lens to her work. Shauna integrates somatic approaches, including trauma-informed yoga, with traditional talk therapy to support clients in reconnecting with their bodies and cultivating self-compassion. Her journey into the mental health field began through peer support work during university and her own personal healing experiences with anxiety, fitness, and food. Shauna has facilitated eating disorder support groups focused on DBT skills, exercise, and recovery at organizations such as Hopewell Eating Disorder Support Center in Ottawa and Sheena's Place in Toronto. She's also supported trauma survivors through the Victim Quick Response Program in partnership with Halton Regional Police. In her private practice, she provides a holistic, client-centered space for healing and growth. If you're feeling called to learn more, be sure to follow Shauna on Instagram at Equilibrium Psych. That's Equilibrium PSYCH. You can also find her on Facebook at Shauna Wallace at Equilibrium Psychotherapy and through her website at equilibriumpsych.com. For all things Mind the Gaps, you can find me on Instagram at kirsten.davidson in addition to my new website, mindthegaps.co. If you like what you hear today, taking a moment to rate and review the podcast episode is always greatly appreciated. We couldn't do this without your support, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So my first question for you is how you would define disordered eating and how would you say it shows up in ways that people might not realize?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So how I usually explain it to clients, because this is a very common question, or just kind of with the general public too, I think there's a misunderstanding around what that means. The way I see it is it's on a spectrum. So on this end of the spectrum, we have diagnosed eating disorders. So either a doctor, psychologist, or psychiatrist is diagnosing those from the DSM-5. They're going through all the criteria, so on and so forth. I think that's typically what people think of when they think of eating disorders / disordered eating. And then I would say on the other side of the spectrum, we have, well, maybe sort of in the middle, we have disordered eating. And then on the very other side, we have well-balanced eating and healthy relationships with food. So people can still experience distress with eating and problematic relationships with food without necessarily having a diagnosed eating disorder, if that makes sense. I would say the majority of my clients may not have a diagnosed eating disorder, but they exhibit disordered eating symptoms. So they may engage in purging or vomiting behaviors, inappropriate laxative use. Perhaps they are compulsively exercising or overtraining, other restrictive behaviors with food, binge eating, eating foods that are non-food items. There's also ARFID as well, which is avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder. So the disordered eating form of that would be really picky eating, difficulty kind of maintaining a regular eating schedule and getting that nourishment in. So it can be basically what I'm trying to say, it can be a whole spectrum of things, but there's this common thought that comes up around seeking help that I'm not sick enough. And so I really like to just hit that point home that if you're experiencing distress, you're deserving of treatment. And it doesn't really matter to me if you have that diagnosis or not. Like, let's talk about the behaviors and how they're impacting your life.
That totally makes sense. As I was writing that question and I kept using the word like disorder, I thought, well, I'm curious what Shauna thinks about the word disorder in disordered eating, and if you view it as an experience or as a condition. Because I think, again, like when you're describing it as a spectrum, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how that's more experiential. But then on the one, far left side, it's very specific to a condition in traditional terms.
That's a really important insight, I think. My brain automatically goes to my trauma-informed training. So yeah, even that word disorder. And we talked about that. The last time we talked about that, I remember, was in my yoga teacher training. But even that word suggests that you are out of order, or you are not on the path, the straight and narrow path that you ought to be. You are over here somewhere. So I think that can automatically bring up some feelings and thoughts for folks that, like, I'm not okay. Like, oh, what have I done wrong? I really resonate with the idea that your nervous system is responding, totally appropriately to abnormal situations. And I think that can be true for disordered eating or eating disorders as well, that coping, that set of coping strategies has arisen from a need to perhaps regulate your nervous system or feel in control, or maybe disconnect from your body or feel a sense of achievement, or regulate emotions, like whatever it might be. And so I kind of see it in that way. That's maybe part of it. The other part too, I feel challenged by that idea of a condition, because it's so different day to day. And I think that if you're relying on that to determine how okay you are, it might be not the most helpful metric, because we're presenting so differently day to day. So to me, I care less about that. Of course, it can be helpful in terms of, researching which treatment plans are going to be the most helpful in determining the severity of the situation. Specifically with eating disorders, there's that medical safety component as well. But
yeah, of course,
for the clients that come into my office and who I meet with virtually, I'm thinking more about what are the symptoms and what's the functional impairment of that? How is that impacting your day-to-day life? These labels can help us or hurt us. And I think some areas that clients or people can find it's helpful is in guiding them towards finding like-minded people who are also seeking similar supports, or finding that level of treatment that's appropriate for them. So, sometimes by getting that diagnosis, they go, oh, I have, bulimia nervosa. Oh, now I can seek out resources for that. And now I can seek out support groups. And maybe even now I can bring this up to my doctor. They can run certain tests. Oh, I am actually eligible for outpatient treatment versus inpatient treatment. And oh, this is actually more serious than I thought. I need some extra people on my team to help out.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, because although it's included in the DSM, in the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, I feel that it has a whole other weight of responsibility and concern with it, because it's linked to our physical health. And of course, we can link all of the, mental, psychological stuff to physical. But with bulimia and with anorexia, there could be an immediate risk, an immediate danger. So I think that, it almost falls closer to the medical side of things, right?
Yeah, and that's where it can be a little bit more tricky, but I typically require clients to get an assessment filled out by their doctor, just basically for their doctor to sign off and say, yes, this person is eligible for outpatient treatment because I want to be ethical and safe and responsible in my practice too. So I don't want to be, I want to make sure that I'm being safe too. And it's just not ethical for me to say, sure, yeah, I'll treat you. Meanwhile, I can't monitor their vitals. I can't make sure they're getting enough to eat, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. So you end up working more in tandem with their healthcare team, you find?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And so you mentioned how there can be this overlap between eating disordered eating behaviors, and trauma. So I'm curious if you could share some insights on that intersectionality between trauma and disordered eating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I sort of accidentally stumbled into that intersection with my work. So when I remember when I was in my undergrad, I did a big research project. I was in an arts and science program. And so my final research project was kind of combining the arts and the sciences. And so this is so on brand for me and also for you, but it was using Eastern movement arts in treatment of trauma and just kind of exploring that idea like Qigong, yoga, Tai Chi, and how that could kind of your podcast is called Mind the Gaps, fill in that gap that may be missing. And it was all about the mind-body connection. And so something that did come out, I remember from that research project too, was that disordered eating and eating disorders can result from trauma. And I believe I specialized at sexual trauma as well. So that kind of, I guess, was in the back of my mind. And I definitely do notice that now that a lot of clients that have gone through traumatic events or are experiencing that in their body, there are some implications towards eating, relationship with food, body, exercise, etc. And the flip side, the clients that I'm focusing seem to have some type of trauma history. One of the reasons at the forefront is that there's this mind-body disconnect. And so, when you go through something traumatic, sometimes that is the most advantageous thing that your brain can do for you in that moment, is just kind of like take you away from the situation mentally. So physically you're there, but mentally you're not present. And that can be really helpful for a short period of time. But then as time goes on, you are leaving your home, your body, your home. That was something I remember we talked about the yoga teacher training as well. When you're dissociating, you're ultimately leaving your home. And so long term, that has negative implications. So if we really go into the eating stuff, think hunger cues, fullness cues, maybe even your ability to be intuitive and sense, this seems like a red flag. Well, if you're disconnected to, say, that feeling in your gut or that tightness in your chest that's telling you that you feel really anxious, well, that could have a number of implications into, certain life decisions that you make as well. So yeah, lots of kind of intersectionality around that.
The point you make too about dissociating from your body in response to something traumatic that one has experienced. And in the dissociation, there may be turning to other ways of getting feel-good feelings, dopamine, serotonin, and that can come from food.
That's a really good point too. And if we think about, I'm thinking about this idea of small T trauma versus big T trauma, right? And I was kind of referencing the big T trauma, meaning, not that it is bigger or more important, but just kind of those obvious ones, quote unquote obvious, like maybe it's sexual trauma or abuse, natural disasters, accidents, those types of things. People usually think of that right away when we talk about trauma, right? But
of course,
that little T trauma could be something, again, not that it's less important, but just maybe less obvious, maybe more long-term, like ongoing, neglect or invalidation of emotions and things like that. And typically, actually, it's kind of like an interesting tidbit. Folks that do binge eat or emotionally overeat tend to have had childhood environments where their parents were not able to validate their feelings or didn't model that. So they don't know how to do that. And you're absolutely right. Then maybe they turn to food. Again, maybe like, thank goodness food was there for them because maybe they didn't have anybody else that was. So again, it's the nervous system developing a totally appropriate response due to those or under those circumstances. The problem is, as we age out of that, maybe that strategy causes us more harm than good.
And I like how you're emphasizing that the unhealthy relationship with food from the past was at one point a survival mechanism. It was a way for that person to get through whatever they were going through. And
Mhm.
that's so interesting about the parents not validating emotions and then, the child looking towards something else to feel good.
I was just going to say that that's something in my work with clients that I really try to highlight right away, especially with binge eating and overeating, because there's so much shame and
Hmm.
stigma around that, that I really try to hit the point home of just, like, let's drop the judgment as much as possible. Like, this is what you needed to do at the time to get through. And, like, thank goodness you had that, because I'm sure
Hmm.
that gave you some stability and security, and you were just a child. And how are you supposed to know how to handle those big emotions if A, mom or dad is modeling avoidance of emotions,
Hmm.
stuffing it down or disconnecting from it, and B, you are also told that that's an inappropriate response to a life situation and you have to shove it down? Like, you're a child, you can't make sense of that.
Hmm. Yeah. And so the comfort that comes from eating translates to adult comfort eating, right? And adult disconnection from the body. That's cool too. The idea of leaving your quote unquote home, leaving your body and your body as your home. And there's that neglect to your body and then also probably neglect to emotions. So when they're coming to you, I'm sure it's a bit of a shock in both senses because they're facing emotions and in turn they'd be facing their body. Like they'd be maybe developing a closer relationship with their body.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I noticed too, a similarity between the two is that there's oftentimes a fear around turning up the volume,
Mhm.
speak on those sensations for a number of reasons. So maybe it's that, that dissociation has kept them feeling psychologically, emotionally safe for a long period of time. Maybe for certain folks with the eating piece, they're fearful of the sensation of hunger or fullness. Maybe
Mm.
they have stories about that. Maybe they just find it really uncomfortable. And so I notice, yeah, that's something. Maybe they are uncomfortable in their body from a sensory perspective or body image perspective. So tuning into the body feels very stressful. And I
Mhm.
notice it's very similar with trauma survivors as well, especially if they've gone through any type of sexual trauma. That's
Mhm.
especially pertinent. So that's kind of this dance that we do, because you can't neglect that part. You do need to be able to return home to your body and reestablish it as safe, but you must do the scary thing to make it less scary, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. As you're saying all this, it makes complete sense in my brain now why you chose to do somatic work as well. And I'll ask you if you could explain that to listeners what somatic work means in psychotherapy, but essentially it's tying, your mental emotional work into the physical body.
Yeah, I think you're exactly correct. It's almost impossible to ignore the somatic piece. I think once you start getting more and more into the types of fields that I work with, the more work that I do, the more I come to the conclusion that our emotions and our mental schemas are very much physically intertwined because of our nervous systems and the work of Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory, if you're familiar with that or any of the listeners are familiar with that. Our emotions are our body. So if I said to you, you're excited about something, and you're telling me I'm so excited about this, and I say, okay, well, how would you know? How do you know you're excited? What
Mhm.
tells you that you're excited? How do you determine that?
The butterfly feeling in your stomach, the heart racing, maybe, yeah, elevated heart rate, feeling more energized. So yeah, immediately physical is what we tend to think of, right?
Yeah, there's so many physical sensations and reactions that are tied to that. So if we are disconnected from that, we're missing out on so much information. And I guess that's like tying it back to the trauma piece. That's where folks can really struggle to maybe trust themselves, or sometimes, making impulsive decisions or decisions that don't benefit them because they are so disconnected from that, like, oh, I have this, literally that's saying a feeling in my gut
Mhm.
that something is wrong, right? Well, if you can't connect to that feeling or it feels unsafe to tune into that, then you're missing out on a whole lot of information.
Mhm.
Basically, I guess my philosophy is that facilitating that mind-body connection is so integral to the psychotherapy work. And so just like you said, a lot of times it is tuning into, okay, where do you feel that in your body? Sometimes it's sort of titrating that experience. So being able to sit with clients and help them to maybe expand into that sensation and then back off a little bit and know that they can do that as well. Trying to pair that sensation with safety and relaxation. So kind of systematic relaxation with that, because there can almost be a feedback loop too. So you get really anxious and then you go, oh my God, I'm anxious. This is the worst thing ever. I'm going to die. And then cue more anxiety. So like, how can we also interrupt that loop?
What are some of the somatic practices that you use in your therapy office?
Oh, that's a good question. I like to integrate some yoga principles too in sessions. So sometimes it's like, okay, if I use a lot of sort of visual body feedback as well. So if I see them, starting to kind of clench or become tight, or I notice changes in their facial expressions, I might just kind of, note that and check in with them, like what's coming up for you right now. And maybe usually I do encourage movement of some type. So like, okay, let's stand up, let's shake it out, let's stretch. Maybe it's, giving themselves a little bit of a massage by swinging their arms side to side. Sometimes there are some eye stretches that we can do, neck stretches, some different things like that. Typically, I would encourage, from what I've learned, there are a lot of sensory receptors in our palms and also our feet and our joints as well. So when we can ground down through our feet, wiggle our toes, rub our hands together, move our joints, our knuckles, our wrists, our spine, flexion and extension of the spine, and all the joints in our body, that helps us to get grounded in the here and now. So that's something that I just kind of getting grounded, I guess, to sum it up, and the physical body session would be something that I do a lot of.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool too, to have the, I think just as I'm hearing you say that, to have the training to be able to implement that confidently, right? To know with the client, if the client's feeling apprehensive about like, oh, I'm going to do what now? Like I'm going to jump around, or I'm going to like move my arms, to, for you to be there as the expert and to back it with research and back it with like, here's how this is actually helping your nervous system, because I would say this is less traditional in the therapy room, right? So that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, like people give me funny looks. They don't want to do it. But I try to model it as well. Like I don't care. I'm gonna get up. I'll look silly. I'll dance around. I'll shake around. I'll whatever. Do you need some water? Do you need to go to the bath? Do you need to walk to the end of the hallway and come back? It can be as simple as that. It can be a yawn, right? Activating the vagus nerve. It can be like a lot of things that you might do in a yoga studio as well, right? Thinking about like fluttering out your lips. That kind of lion's breath, the ujjayi breath with the breath retention, like all of these things are also regulating to the nervous system too. So I'll also invite clients to bring in their own techniques. Like, what do you know about your body that works for you? What's been helpful for you? Because I can help, suggest certain techniques and things like that. But at the end of the day, for example, you are the expert in Kirsten. You've lived in your body for your whole life. You are bound to have some really important expertise that I don't have on you.
Yeah, that must require a lot of openness from the client too. And I think that's great that you're modeling it, like you're showing, I'm demonstrating that what we learn about in therapy called unconditional positive regard, which means you are free from any type of judgment towards the client. So you also have to be free of that judgment towards yourself. Because if you're super rigid, then how would you be able to help the client relax? And as we're talking, I'm just remembering I sent Shauna a text the other day. I was at the gym and I noticed some people with their shoulders seemingly up to their ears. And I thought of her and said, do you ever see people in public that are just like so tightly bound and you want to just go up to them and like push their shoulders down and gently invite them to tune into their body? I just thought it was interesting to see at the gym, right? Because that's a place where we theoretically should be in tune with our body, but you see so much disconnect still.
No, it's such an important point. And I remember I'd been to a conference on somatic trauma treatment, and that was one of the points that was made was about physical posture and what you can tell
Mhm.
from that. And there was a connection towards nervous system state. So the idea was that almost like two different freeze responses. Usually we think
Mm.
about freeze and like fight, flight, freeze, right? Deer in the headlights, and what kind of body posture that is. Right? It's rigid, but it's, maybe you're up here, high alert, and maybe your shoulders are up here, as opposed to a different type of freeze, which is almost like, preparation for death. And it's going to look a lot more like this. And it's
Mm.
more a collapse, dorsal vagal shutdown response. So
Mhm.
sometimes that can be a clue. And those are called somatic markers when you can
Mm.
kind of see in people's posture, what that sometimes can give a clue as to where their nervous system is at. Sometimes I remember another really interesting thing I learned from that conference too. Sometimes if people are looking up quite a bit, that may be connected to childhood. If they're always, looking towards a caregiver, seeking something from someone,
Mm.
expecting
Wow.
something, so, may or may not resonate. Sometimes I'll bring those pieces in though and just kind of say, okay, like this is what I'm observing. Did you notice that? Sometimes they don't even notice at
Mhm.
all. But just getting that feedback can help them also to reconnect to their body. So I know I was doing a trauma processing session with a client a few months ago, and part of the work is just helping them to relax. So when they're doing it, if I'm noticing that they're, tensing up, and one of the things I mentioned to her was that, yeah, you're actually not breathing. So I would just say, I just kind of go
Mhm.
as that audible reminder to, okay, let it go, breathe it out. Like, don't hold your breath, because you're kind of reinforcing that that freeze
Mhm.
response.
Yeah. Wow. And it can be as simple as that, right? Like seeing someone just actually stiffening and holding their breath, forgetting to do the one thing that should otherwise come pretty naturally, but because of that trauma response, it may not. And as you're sharing all of this, I'm just curious about, we've talked about overeating. What would you say about restrictive eating and more of the anorexia nervosa, bulimia? How does that show up with the relationship to trauma?
Yeah, that's a good question. Control seems to be a big piece, and a lot of people are kind of aware of that part.
Mm.
I think sometimes it can be an overcorrection, right? When you feel so out of control, and then there's this part of your life where it seems like, oh, I can totally manage this. And hey, maybe I feel a sense of accomplishment. Maybe I feel a sense of euphoria, or people are congratulating me and they're praising me because, I have so much quote unquote willpower. Sometimes that can be a piece.
Hmm.
Sometimes in the aftermath of trauma, people, again, they become disconnected to those hunger cues, and maybe it starts off as that, like, oh, I'm just not hungry, I don't want to eat. And then perhaps they drop some weight, and then they get that social reinforcement of, wow, you look so great. Da, 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 da. And then there may be a fear around regaining weight. So that
Hmm.
could be another piece. Actually, I have seen that a few times too, that it could be a medical issue or a mental health issue that causes someone's body to change. And then they kind of become attached to that
Mm.
body, or they get treated better by people, because our society is weight biased and fat phobic largely, and it
Hmm.
can be hard to say goodbye to that. So those would be a couple of the things that come to my mind right away.
Okay. Yeah. What would you say you deal with mostly in your client base? The overeating, the restricted eating, or is it about 50-50?
Ooh. So here's the thing. What I tell a lot of clients is that it's kind of like there are multiple pendulums going on at the same time. So you have one pendulum, there's restriction on one side, and
Hmm.
then potentially overeating on the other side. So,
Hmm.
if you're hanging out in the restriction zone long enough, your body is going to fight back, because your body doesn't care about being skinny. It doesn't care about what you want it to look like. It doesn't care about any of those things. It just wants to survive. So if you
Hmm.
hang out long enough in that zone, it tends to morph into binge eating, or what people may think is binge eating or overeating. Sometimes I say, oh, eating, because
Hmm.
you're just not eating enough, and your body's going to fight back. And there are certain things that are happening biologically too. So, for example, When you don't eat for a long time, your brain releases more neuropeptide Y. It makes you crave carbs. There's this feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm a bottomless pit. I'm just a vacuum, and I can't stop. And you feel out of control. And then when you feel out of control for long enough, then you swing back to the other side with the restriction. So there's kind of that pendulum going on. And then maybe there's another pendulum of being overly controlling of yourself, and then guilt. So what I mean by that is, you're like, I got to be on this diet. I don't like my body, so on and so forth. But being an adult, or if we are adult kids, whatever, anybody doesn't really like to be told what to do. If you have a healthy sense of self, you don't like to be told what to do for too long. So then you swing to the other side and you're kind of like, screw that. I'm doing whatever I want. I don't want to do this dieting BS anymore. But the problem with that is that if you're there long enough, you may develop an extreme sense of guilt. So maybe you're binging, maybe you're overeating, maybe you're letting all your routines fly by the wayside. When you feel so guilty, that's going to swing you back to the other side. So I would say most people have some kind of a combination of both. And even if they're not necessarily binging or overindulging on food, that may pop up in another area of life. So for example, substance use, maybe it's lashing out at other people, so on and so forth. And for the folks that are doing more of the binging, even though, conventionally they're not restricting, they're like, oh, well, no, that's not the problem, Shauna. Like, you're not hearing me. I'm not under eating, I'm overeating. No, I hear you. But are you mentally restricting? Are you eating and saying, I shouldn't have this. I'm such a bad person for having this. I got to make up for this with, an extra workout tomorrow. You're limiting and restricting satisfaction of food for yourself.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a powerful shift on binging and purging and binging and restricting, that you can't really have one without the other, regardless of whether they're overweight, underweight, or healthy weight. What's really going on are those pendulums inside, and that determines their health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would say I typically assume that most people have some kind of a combination of both. And they may kind of live more on one side of the pendulum than the other, but typically I notice it's kind of and this is kind of why I call my practice equilibrium. It's about finding that balance. And most people, they're struggling to kind of live in that middle zone.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So how would you say, you mentioned, the societal expectations of body image and relationship with food. How would you say someone could start to heal their relationship with food and movement in a culture that promotes restriction, promotes control, promotes this, physique that is the quote unquote ideal? As I ask that too, there's of course benefits of being healthy, like being within your weight range and having muscle mass and all of these things too. So I'm also curious, like, how you balance that piece of it as well, that with body positivity, we also want to make sure we're not like enabling behaviors that could actually cause someone to die young, say if they're like very overweight and there's no addressing that, right, for fear of rocking the boat. Sorry, that was a very loaded question.
No, it's okay. I'm jotting down a couple things because there are so many things I want to address. So I operate from a health at every size perspective. I would encourage folks to look into that health at every size and get kind of familiar with that term. But there are a number of principles with health at every size. The basic building blocks of it are focusing on health enhancing behaviors and health promoting behaviors, as opposed to body shape, size, weight. So a lot of the research, if folks are more interested, I really recommend the book Intuitive Eating. A lot of the research has been showing that dieting is actually not effective in the long term. And past 5 years, there have really not been longitudinal studies that follow up with people past 5 years that shows that they keep the weight off. So most people, I believe it's about 2/3 or more, it might be 3/4 of people gain all the weight back, if not more. And that weight cycling actually has negative health implications. So not just to body image, but also there are cardiac implications as well. Lots of different issues with that, metabolic implications, so on and so forth. So it's actually a little bit of an outdated belief to focus solely on BMI, which was created by a mathematician, believe it or not. And it's based on, it's very Euro male centric.
Right.
I don't know about you. I'm not a European male born in the 1800s, 1900s, doesn't apply so much to me. It also, BMI doesn't include anything about muscularity, right? It's simply, just your weight and height. So I typically do lead with that in talking to clients as well, just kind of some psycho education on, BMI. What does it tell us? Not a whole lot. It's your gravitational pull to the earth, right? You could be an Olympian and you could be technically classified as quote unquote obese. So, from my perspective, it's a lot more helpful to look at other markers of health as well. I also work with clients to advocate for themselves with their primary care physicians. If their primary care physicians are telling them they need to lose weight to improve X, whatever health condition, ask them, is this the same treatment plan you would recommend to a thin person? Because there can be a lot of weight bias as well in the healthcare field. So
that's a great question.
Yeah, I also would mention too, so with intuitive eating, there is kind of this misnomer that, intuitive eating just means like you eat donuts all the time and you just, get all indulgent and you don't do any movement. No. So intuitive eating by definition is listening to your body's cues. And I know that I'm sure you've shared with your listeners that you're diabetic, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Imagine if you were eating in a way that, sure, like for your taste, but not for your blood sugar, how that would feel if you're doing that, meal after meal. Like if you decided I'm only going to eat Cinnabons for, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Sure, it might sound good at first, but I'm also pretty positive your body would be giving you some feedback that it wouldn't be, the best option for you. Maybe you'd experience blood sugar crashes. Maybe you wouldn't be sleeping well. You'd feel sick. So eating according to your medical needs should, in theory, feel pretty good in your body. And most people, when you do, this is kind of the paradox, when you give yourself unconditional permission to eat, that's when you can tune in more to your body symptoms, because your brain knows, I'm going to be getting this food. I can eat this cinnamon bun today, tomorrow, the next day. Okay, cool. So now I'm free to actually tune into my body, as opposed to I have to have this now. If I can't have this now, I can never have this again, because it's not.
Right. Yeah. So it's that fear-based approach to food versus, I always look at things from like, are you going at it from fear? Or are you going at it from love? So it's like developing more of that loving relationship to your body and to food. And you had shared with me the concept of interoceptive awareness. Am I saying that correctly? And how, well, I'll let you explain it, but you were bringing it in context of me being type 1 diabetic. So maybe I'll let you explain that one.
Yeah. So basically, interoceptive awareness is your ability to tune into those bodily cues. So that could be hunger, fullness. It could be needing to use the washroom. It could be drinking water. And the problem is there's a lot of stigma around attuning to hunger and fullness cues. So, people will say things like, I just ate, I can't be hungry again, or, there are a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts. But imagine us sitting here, and if I said, I really need to use the washroom. But I can't. That would be indulgent. I just used the washroom 30 minutes ago. Right? Like we laugh, but that's basically what we're doing with food a lot of the time. So yeah, the awareness piece is being able to tune in. And there's another concept called interoceptive responsiveness, which is being able to attend to those cues and give yourself what you need. So for example, I'm parched. That's the awareness. Responsiveness. Here's my water bottle. I'm drinking the water now. Lovely. So I guess this ties back to your question about, how can folks start to cultivate a healthier relationship with food and exercise? My mind goes to, can we start with the basics and attuning to those basic needs instead of trying to shut them down? So maybe it's for myself, I've been trying to actually, this sounds really weird and odd, but like use the bathroom when I need to use the bathroom instead of like, oh, I'll wait to, no, I don't need to, I'll just wait, I'll drive, another 30 minutes and then I'll, whatever. No, like let's take that seriously and let's go pee when we need to go pee. Like, why are we trying to ignore or suppress that signal, right? So like that's just a really simple one. But I think that can be really powerful and just kind of confirming to yourself, nope, this is a signal. This is important. I need to attend to this now.
For sure. And as you're explaining what that means to listeners, I'm reminded of what I felt when you explained it to me in terms of being diabetic. We joked, like Shauna and I joked that, oh, I have this superpower of being interoceptive. And I would say that the awareness of it, yes, that feels like a superpower because I can really feel when my blood sugar's off. Anyone would be able to, anyone that's type 1 or type 2, I'm assuming as well, would feel the highs and the lows. But then the other part of it is the acting on it, right? So there's okay, I'm feeling low, I'm gonna have a juice box right away. For me, that's easy because I have this fear of going low and rendering myself unconscious. So I'm like, okay, no, I need to take action right away. But let's say on the higher side, like I'm a bit high, but I'm doing this thing. I don't want to go low after. I don't want that to interfere with my day. So maybe I'm not actually giving myself the insulin I needed to in that moment. For listeners, insulin is the hormone that brings your blood sugar down and levels you. And so with that can be a little bit more tricky. So I like how you're dividing it into the awareness and then the action, because it's not that if you have one, you automatically have the other.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think that for folks that are trying to develop a more safe and secure relationship with their bodies, that's a good place to start. And that can extend to even something like food and workouts too. So a lot of times I speak with clients about this idea of Tracy Tilka, she calls it body food choice congruence. And that just sounds like a bunch of like jargon, but essentially Christy Harrison calls it making the match. So making the match between what food is going to be appealing and helpful to me, and then how can I kind of provide myself that? So for example, I'm really hungry. Is it snack hunger or meal hunger? Okay, yeah, I think I need a meal. Okay, would I like something cold or hot? Would I like something crunchy or smooth? Do I want there to be many colors arranged on the plate, or does it want to be more simple? Like trying to figure out how much prep time do you have even, and trying to figure that out. So that comes up with food, but also with movement too. Checking in with yourself. Okay, you know what? I had such and such a workout planned. However, I'm feeling super drained. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm really sore, from my workout yesterday. Okay, maybe how can I listen to that and attune to my body in that moment as well?
How would you say that listeners could be kinder to themselves and apply more compassion when they decide to adjust their plan, whether that be with movement or with food? Because as you're describing that, I'm thinking, I bet there's a bunch of people feeling though, like, well, I can't abandon my plan or I'm failing, right?
Yeah, so usually there is a lot of black and white thinking that comes up. So it requires a bit of flexibility and thinking in shades of gray. And typically the suggestion would be moving from rules to guidelines and moving from, okay, all of this time, this must happen towards, for the most part, so on and so forth. So, instead of, I must have X amount of servings of fruits and vegetables every day, towards, for the most part, I try to get X amount of fruits and vegetables per day. So that can introduce some flexibility, and being able to flex to your context and your situation is really important too. I would also say as well, is that, how is that rule or guideline helping or hurting you? Is it serving you or not so much? So looking at how it's actually operating for you in your day-to-day life. Yes, getting your workouts in, for example, can be super important to support your mental, emotional, physical well-being. However, if you're starting to become really drained, if you're starting to clock watch at the gym, if you're skipping out on social opportunities because of that, could be a little bit of an issue to look at further.
Bringing everything to that equilibrium, the middle ground where you can still say, like, I'm going to change my plan today. And that doesn't make me weak. If anything, in my eyes, like, that's strength. That's a sign of strength to confidently be like, you know what? Let's just adapt because I'm in tune with myself today.
Yeah, I tend to suggest like looking at what your intention is behind whatever the choice is and going from there. Because maybe in some ways, skipping the workout could be compassionate because they've got a lot on the go and they're super stressed about a lot of other stuff they have that day and their mind's just not
Right.
in it. And I almost like have my own term of exercise burnout. I don't know.
Right.
I feel like if you're an athletic person or someone who's into exercising a lot, you've kind of felt that or had that experience where you go to something just because it's in your schedule, but you're just mentally, you're not there. You don't want to be there. Almost usually I feel like workouts make me feel better, but there is the rare time where, I really would have benefited more from resting or just kind of taking time out of my day to organize myself in other ways. And I would have come back to my workout routine or whatever the next day, feeling a lot more refreshed and excited to be there. So I think that's another benefit of sometimes taking a step back, is just like preserving the satisfaction for your workout routine. And I'd also, along with your question of like, how can people start to take that step or how can they be more compassionate with themselves with that? I wrote down pets and babies. And what I mean by that is, thinking about how you would treat a pet or how you would treat a child or a baby. So imagine, you have your dog, Captain Arf Arf or whatever. And, it's raining. And so you typically take Captain Arf Arf out for a walk every day, but it's raining. And imagine you dragging him in the rain saying, no, we have to do this. We have to do this, even though it's like storming, it's thundering, it's lightning out, and he is not wanting to be there. Like, does that really make sense, in that day? And to that same point, imagine you decided, okay, no, we're not going to go out in the rain. So guess what, Captain Arf Arf, you don't get dinner tonight. Like, that would be ridiculous, right? And a lot of us would go, no, I would never do that to my pet. And yet we do that to ourselves. Right? We make these rules, we do this little compensation game, and it's not compassionate. On the flip side, maybe some days Captain Arf Arf is looking really, lethargic and tired, and that he loves going on a walk, and even if he doesn't like it initially, like he might later. So maybe you're going to take him for a 5-minute walk, see how he feels. Okay, if he's perking up and now he's awake and ready to go, you'll finish that walk. And if no, he actually looks really tired, okay, let's actually turn back and go home. So sometimes too, I think it's difficult to parse out because the most compassionate thing to do for ourselves is not always the easiest.
Yeah, I love how you're relating it to a dog because I feel like anyone that has a pet of any kind knows what compassion and empathy is, at least towards their animal. And, if we could start to treat ourselves with that same kindness, that would probably be a really good step forward.
Yeah. Thinking about how we treat animals, how we treat our friends, if you would recommend that same diet and exercise regime to them, maybe regime, that's kind of a Freudian slip. Or also babies too, right? Imagine treating that helpless, vulnerable baby and making those same calls like, oh, no, you didn't crawl enough today, so you don't get dinner. Imagine that, And so that, I think, coming back to what intuitive eating and movement is, it's ultimately getting back to how we were able to relate to food and movement as kids, as babies. So babies, they're hungry, they eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full, they crawl around a little bit, they get tired, they go to sleep. It's a lot more natural and easy for them without all those societal messages, right? But even I was thinking today about just kind of like the innocence and purity of being a child and like going outside in the summer and you're running around and just for the fun of it, you're maybe playing frisbee and you're jumping around with monkey bars. And then you come home, you go, oh my gosh, I'm so thirsty. And you grab that water, right? That like really loud, obnoxious little kid. And you get your freezy and you have your ice cream and you're playing by the pool. Just kind of like that idea of you're so tuned into what feels good for your body. So that's really where we're trying to get back to.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a beautiful way to tie it up, that we just want to get back to that like childlike relationship to ourselves when it comes to movement and eating. Cause I think everyone probably has a memory similar to that one. Like I got goosebumps as you're describing it. It's like, oh my God, I remember those days. Like I remember that feeling of you are just following what you feel you need with no thoughts about like how that's going to look on you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously easier said than done, but it does take some, I guess, deprogramming is the word, and trying to unlearn some of the nonsense that we've collected throughout the years after.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Shauna, for being with us today. This was so informative. I learned so much today, so I'm excited for everyone to hear this.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, I invite you to participate in a growth zone challenge. I invite you to take a second, a gap in your day right now and share this episode with 2 other people. Thank you for minding the gaps with me. I'll see you next time on the journey out of our comfort zones and into our growth zones.